Hey there, it's Chris with Acton Creative, and this is a handwoven experience. And in today's episode, I'm going to be tackling planning a weaving project with ease. Now, if you are a baby beginner weaver, you have someone else planning your projects, and that's the way it should be because you have bigger fish to fry. You have to focus on learning how to weave your projects and how to dress a loom, and those are major things. However, once you have those checked off, and one day it'll come, you'll have an idea. You'll think, ooh, I'm gonna create my own project. From start to finish, A to Z, I'm gonna do all the things. You'll be ready to plan your own project. Now, if you've ever seen a weaving planning page, they can be intimidating. There's about 18 blanks to fill in, and there's numbers everywhere, and it looks like higher level math for sure. But my job as a teacher is to help make all of that seem more approachable. So today we're going to talk about how to just make it easier, how to look at planning a project and take out some of the kind of stress and confusion. So as we think about a weaving project, for me, let's talk about three different important elements. Number one, the yarn. That makes sense. We're weavers. We deal with yarn all the time. But that is absolutely a major part of the process. Number two, the equipment, the loom. Every loom is a little different, right? So it's definitely an important part of any weaving project. And lastly, well, you are definitely a factor in any weaving project. You could give two weavers the same instructions and you would still find differences because it has a human touch. It's important. So let's take those three elements and find a way to make the planning part easier just by understanding them. Okay, so let's start back at number one with our friend, the yarn. I recommend that you have a favorite. Play favorites, folks. Have a favorite yarn for you. That doesn't mean that you only use one fiber for the rest of your life. Please don't. There's a whole entire world of great yarns out there. You should absolutely try them. That doesn't mean that you can't have a go-to. Have one that is the one that you come back to. Just one. What this does by having a favorite is that it gives you an opportunity to use this yarn multiple times so you really understand how it works. How is it going to function in the project? What spacing do you use? How is it going to shrink? How is it for finishing? You start to really become best friends with this particular yarn. So when you get to your planning page, you know that your 8/4 cotton, or my 8/4 cotton in this case, my 8/4 cotton, I'm going to set it at 12 ends per inch, which is the set, S-E-T-T. Ends per inch, EPI. That is the spacing in between the warp yarns. And that's one of the major things you have to decide for any planning project. So I know that if I want a twill spacing, let's say this yarn is going to be set at 12 ends per inch. Voila, you know those numbers because you know the yarn. I also know that when it comes to shrinkage, kind of the back end of the process, is that I am gonna pick anywhere between 10 and 12% because I know this yarn. So that is the benefit to having a favorite, to having a go-to yarn, is that when you come to the planning process, you're like, great, I can fill in those gaps, fill in those blanks, no problem. Let's talk about the equipment, the loom. Now, every loom has its own little idiosyncrasies for sure. And I think what's interesting is that even between my table loom and my floor loom, they're both a little different. So it's important to really learn the quirks of your loom. And one of the major things that you can pay attention to is how much wasted or dead space is in the middle of the loom. Here's what I mean by that. As you're weaving your project, you are always going to lose inches in the middle. And here's why. Each warp yarn is tied to a rod at the back, and you need to keep tension on that yarn, so you have to keep it tied. So there is a certain amount of inches between the back and the front that you're going to lose with every single project. But every loom has a slightly different variation of how many inches that is. So figure out your loom. How many inches do you lose with this loom? I lose about 12. That's usually what I plan for. Right in the middle, I have 12 inches I'm never going to get back of my project because of just the way weaving works. So By learning your loom, you can then fill in that gap on your planning page. You're like, oh, I got it. I have to plan for 12 extra inches in the length of my warp yarns. Done. Piece of cake. And lastly, let's talk about you. Now, one of the big places that you can pay attention to you as a weaver is your draw-in. How much do you lose from the width of your project between the reed and where the fabric is? Here's what I mean. Let's say my width in the reed is 14 inches. If you measure the fabric here, it is 13 inches. I lose 1 inch, and that is very standard for me. So when I look at a planning page and the width, what I'm planning for, I always add 1 inch because I understand me. I understand how I work as a weaver. Now, will that vary per project? Absolutely. There's definitely going to be some wiggle room. However, as a place to start, I always add 1 inch for my how much I'm pulling in from side to side. I also have noticed and documented how much I need for the knots. Now, if you imagine each of your warp yarns has to be tied to the front of the loom and also to the back of the loom. So how many inches do you need to make that knot? Some people need hardly any, which I always find amazing, but I need a good 7 inches to comfortably make a knot and tie it to the front and to the back. Now I know that. Okay, great. So I need 14 inches for the knots and I need 12 inches for the waist in the middle. That is 26 inches. When I go to plan my next project, I know that is how many inches I add to the project because of the loom and because of me. See how that works? So instead of looking at a blank page with every project and 18 things to fill out, suddenly you got about, maybe 8 or 10 because you understand parts of the process. You understand your yarn, you understand your equipment, and you understand you. And that's kind of the best way to start to simplify the whole process. And if the process is simpler, you will do it much more frequently and with much more enthusiasm. That is human nature for sure. So friends, best of luck planning your next project and help yourself out. Pay attention to some of those things so that planning a weaving project, piece of cake. Have a wonderful week. Happy weaving.